But what I wanted to do was, first of all, tell you a little bit about who we are, this organization called the Catholic Climate Covenant. I left some propaganda on the table, so feel free to take some or recycle it, I guess, if that's your preference, or give it to someone else. So we were founded in 2006. This June, we're going to celebrate our 10-year anniversary. We are supported by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops and 13 other national Catholic groups. And we are a partnership, a real partnership of those groups. So one of the things that we try to do is help all of those organizations figure out how to use Catholic teaching on the issue of the environment and climate change in their own way. So you can see all the groups listed there. What we try to do is we try to encourage dialogue. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We try to build relationships between people and organizations, and we help to try to lower carbon footprints. And we do this, one tool that we use is the St. Francis Pledge to Care for Creation and the Poor. And notice that it's both creation and the poor. And I think that's the unique part of Catholic teaching on this, is that it's the planet and the poor. And those pledge cards are also on your table there. So the goals of what I'd like to try to do in the brief time that we have is to review a little bit of Laudato Si. I'm sure all of you read it from cover to cover. It's probably right at your bedside table. We're going to reflect a little bit on parish life and Laudato Si. How do we talk about this in our parishes? And then how we, the Covenant, Catholic Climate Covenant, how we can help you, and then I'll have a few concluding remarks. So as you look at this little wordle here of Laudato Si, let me just say this. In the document itself, Pope Francis says that this is something for everyone. At the very beginning of the document, he says this isn't just for bishops, not even just for Catholics, but it's for everyone. It has a lot of the same lyrics, but a far different tune. And those of us who now know and love Pope Francis realize that he says things a little bit more bluntly, a little bit more with a little bit sharper edge sometimes. Laudato Si is really about facing reality. It's a moral vision. It's not a policy prescription or a scientific blueprint. It talks a lot about how human values must begin to guide technology. It offers hope. You wouldn't know it going through about the first 3/4 of it, but the document does offer a lot of hope as well. The Pope says the Creator does not abandon us. And it's a call for dialogue, where Pope Francis says the interest or ideologies will not prejudice the common good. In the document, Pope Francis himself, and certainly in drafting Laudato Si, takes a lot of inspiration from St. Francis. He says St. Francis is the patron saint of all who study and work in the area of ecology, and he is also much loved by non-Christians. He goes on, he says, he shows us just how inseparable the bond is between concern for nature, justice for the poor, commitment to society, and interior peace. Francis helps us see that an integral ecology calls for openness to categories which transcend the language of mathematics and biology and take us to the heart of what it is to be human. He also says, if we thought about it some, and let me just do this for just a second. I know this is something you tend to do with high schoolers, but I want to do it with you as well. So what I want you to do for me is just close your eyes for a second. I'm going to say a word, and when I say that word, I want you to think of the image that first comes into your mind, okay? No cheating, eyes closed. The word is environment. Okay, open your eyes. So, when I said environment and an image popped into your mind, was the image, raise your hand if the image was like a body of water, a river, a lake, or something like that. Raise your hands, just so we can see. Okay. How about, a vista, a mountain or trees or something like that? Okay, a lot more hands. Okay. How about pollution? Okay, a couple people. When I said the word environment, who saw people in that? Raise your hands. Okay, that's 2. So that's pretty typical, right? When in this culture, in this society, when we think about the word environment, we often think of something out there. We don't think of it as us, as part of us, or as people being impacted by it. And I think Pope Francis is talking a lot about that. And he talks about where have you found God? And I know for me, I had this very profound experience. Pope Francis talks about this. He says, the history of our relationship, of our friendship with God is always linked to particular places, which take on an intensely personal meaning. We all remember places, and revisiting those memories does us much good. Anyone who has grown up in the hills, or used to sit by the spring to drink or play outdoors in the neighborhood square, going back to these places is a chance to recover something of their true selves. And I think that's really, that's true for me. I just to share a quick story. So I studied at the Franciscan School of Theology in Berkeley. That's where I got my master's. And so we lived in, my wife and I, when we were first married, lived in California for a time. And her parents had this beautiful cabin up on Donner Lake. Those of you who are familiar with the region, yay, Donner Lake, up near Lake Tahoe. So I went up there for a weekend retreat by myself, because when you, and I know all of you have been there, right? I think of the doubt comment you had this morning, Father Ralph. But there's this moment where you have these doubts when you're studying theology, when you're trying to figure out, is this the truth, right? So I go up and I have this big long retreat by myself, and I'm asking these existential questions. You know, why am I here? Are you real, God? You know, and I'm really listening. I'm, praying. I'm taking some hikes. I'm going out in the woods and everything. Nothing's coming. So I get in my little Datsun B210 to drive back to Berkeley, and it's evening time, and I'm driving on I-80, and at that point I'm heading a little bit south, and I'm saying, God, I'm really disappointed in you, because there is nothing that happened, and I spent a lot of time trying to figure it out, and then I just paused for a minute. I looked to my left, which was west. The sun is east. The sun is setting in the west. There's snow-capped mountains that are pink and just gorgeous. And I said, okay, I get it, all right. And that was a real profound moment. I think a lot of us have those moments in our lives where and sometimes it's nature, sometimes it's with another person, but we have those moments, I think, where God, if we just sit and listen, God is there for us. I think Pope Francis is talking about that. Then, in the document, not too far into the document, he starts talking about all of the problems that we are facing with the environment. And he says the speed with which human activity has developed contrasts with a naturally slow pace of evolution. Naturally slow pace of biological evolution. He goes on, following a period of irrational confidence in progress in human abilities, we see increasing sensitivity to the environment and the need to protect nature, along with a growing concern, both genuine and distressing, for what is happening to our planet. So Pope Francis is saying, we look around and it's a mess. But yet there are also signs where things are beginning to change. People are beginning to have more of an awareness. He goes through a whole litany of problems. He talks about our throwaway culture. He talks about smoke, and this is all in the document. Smoke from heating and cooking fuels, transportation, industrial fumes, acidification of soil and water, fertilizers, insecticides, fungicides, herbicides, agrotoxins. That was a new one for me. Waste from homes, businesses, construction, demolition, healthcare, electronic and industrial waste. Production is beyond nature's ability to absorb and to reuse waste. He talks about water shortages, loss of biodiversity, and goes on and on and on. All of this is laid out in the document. You would think that it's some sort of a scientific treatise, but what Pope Francis is doing is he's trying to say, look folks, we're in trouble. We have lots of things that we need to attend to here. And I think probably the most hard-hitting, in my work, I was able to get the document a couple of days ahead of time through the U.S. Bishops' Conference. And so I was reading it and preparing for a press conference that we did and some other things. And it was getting late at night, and I worked very late that day, so I was home, and it's getting late. But I'm only on paragraph 54. And I read this, and I just want you to listen carefully to this. When I talked about a different tune, this is the different tune. Pope Francis says the alliance between the economy and technology ends up sidelining anything unrelated to its immediate interests. Consequently, the most one can expect, now listen, is superficial rhetoric, sporadic acts of philanthropy, and perfunctory expressions of concern for the environment. Whereas any genuine attempt by groups within society to introduce change is viewed as a nuisance based on romantic illusions or an obstacle to be circumvented. He's speaking some truth there, and it's very hard-hitting. But I think he then goes on to what I think, and as you read the document, something else is going to pop out at you. It's like everything he writes, it's fairly lengthy. But I think this is the heart of the encyclical for me. And he begins this with a quote from Benedict XVI. And this quote from Benedict XVI is actually in his first homily as Pope. So this is very early in Benedict's pontificate. The quote from Benedict that is in Laudato Si is, "The external deserts in the world are growing because the internal deserts have become so vast." He goes on, for this reason, the ecological crisis is also a summons to profound interior conversion. It must be said that some committed and prayerful Christians, with the excuse of realism and pragmatism, tend to ridicule expressions of concern for the environment. Others are passive. They choose not to change their habits and thus become inconsistent. What they all need is an ecological conversion whereby the effects of their encounter with Jesus Christ become evident in their relationship to the world around them. Living our vocation to be protectors of God's handiwork is essential to a life of virtue. It is not an optional or secondary aspect of the Christian experience. So again, he's taking this notion that our hearts, our lives, our spiritual grounding is messed up. And so our world is messed up, and vice versa. So the external deserts of the world are growing because the internal deserts have become so vast. This quote also points to this notion which I said earlier about integral ecology. Pope Francis in paragraph 48 says, "The human environment and the natural environment deteriorate together. We cannot adequately combat environmental degradation unless we attend to causes related to human and social degradation." What that says to me is that all of the work that you do as pastors, the sacraments, marriage support, youth development, religious education, and so on, that's all related to what Pope Francis is saying. I think it's all related. So what you do on a regular basis, never mind getting involved, which we'll talk about in a little bit, never mind getting involved in this whole environmental thing, what you do is part of solving the environmental crisis because it's related. The interior life and the exterior life are related. So the challenge, how do we integrate Laudato Si into our parishes? This is a second major theme. So this is some of the things that we think about, right? When we think about the environment, we think, oh, there's Al Gore, there's Rush Limbaugh. Both are wagging their fingers at us. We got the tree hugger, and we've got the person with a huge SUV. These are hard things to talk about in our parishes. But if another major theme besides integral development in Laudato Si is dialogue. And that's what we have to do. We have to start talking about this. When we have those discussions, when we have those conversations, we begin to hear another person's story, right? We begin to understand their point of view, and we tell stories. That's part of what we do as Catholics. Here's a story that I want to share with you, and this is something that was developed for us by another organization called ClearPath. And this is a U.S. story about climate impact. So just, again, it's a way to connect, it's a way to tell a story. And I think this is going to work, but we're going to find out.
A seasonal worker is a struggle. There are workers, but they get through life with basics. They're simple people, they live simple lives. I started orchestring with my dad when I was 5 years old. When I was 13, I started orchestring by myself, and I've done it ever since. It has been really tough in the last few years because of the changes in Apalachicola Bay. It's a love-hate relationship between the man and the bay.
Beginning around 2012, we really started to see a dramatic decline in the oyster populations in Apalachicola Bay. The primary driving factor that determines what can live there and what can't is the amount of salt in the water. We really had a serious drought period, and salinities were very high for a sustained time. Scientists have predicted that we will have a continued gradual rise in temperatures and that we will continue to see rising sea levels in our area. Those two factors are going to impact people and the ecology of our estuary systems.
Being a community that is remote, that doesn't have a lot of other economic engines, we are pretty vulnerable if something doesn't go as planned. Our seafood industry, our tourism industry, most of that is based on the environment, and there's no place else for people to work.
For the poor and marginalized, for those who are hungry, unemployed, uninsured, and uneducated, we pray. Hear our prayer, O Lord, and answer.
When the environment changes, it has a great impact on people's lives. Vulnerable people are going to be affected by the climate change everywhere in this country. And we need to help each other a lot.
The church is concerned about the environment. To the extent that changes in the environment affect human beings, then those changes are moral issues. And as men and women of faith, we do have a responsibility to speak out on moral issues. We should be especially concerned with those who are most vulnerable. We have the opportunity to be their voice.
Here in Franklin County, we work to help the most vulnerable in our community.
Don't expect someone to ride in on a white horse and fix it. You can't duct tape it. You can't fix it on the short term. You have to provide a path and support for people to fix it themselves.
It's a hard life. I've considered leaving the bay and going elsewhere and looking for work, but my heart's not in it. I love this bay. I was raised on it. My father done it. My grandfather done it. And my youngest son loves the bay, and he's already oysters, and I'm struggling with trying to get him to seek a new avenue.
So stories. Let's figure out how we can work together by telling, getting in those dialogues and sharing our stories. Don't talk about climate change if that's uncomfortable for you. Talk about again those stories. What pulls people in? How can we listen to them to see if there's some way that we can come to agreement? Maybe it's just talking about how do we reduce energy use in our parish. How can we talk about caring for creation as opposed to stopping climate change? I think those words can really get conflated, and I think we have to be careful about that. It's interesting that in the encyclical, if you go back to that wordle, in the encyclical, care is used 43 times, and sustainability is only used twice. Protect or protection in the encyclical is 80 times, and that I think is a conservative word. How do we protect things? How do we care for things? I also would like to say that since Pope Francis's encyclical, I know these are a little hard to read, but since Pope Francis's encyclical and his visit in September, there has been a perceivable shift in attitudes, both by Catholics and by people in the United States about global warming or climate change. So you can see in those last two boxes on that slide, the last two are April of last year and October of last year, so before the encyclical and after the visit. And there's an uptick in the number of people who think that global climate change is happening. The same is true for Pope Francis's teachings. He is now a more trusted figure. The red line is Catholics, the blue line are non-Catholics. But in each instance, there are more and more people who are trusting Pope Francis as the messenger, as a believable messenger on climate change. And he has somewhat influenced their beliefs about it and have increased their intensity of concern about it as well. Another slide here. This is from the, there's two organizations that work together. These slides I got from Ed Maybeck, who works at George Mason's Climate Education Institute. Anyway, so there are many more people, Catholics and non-Catholics, who see climate change as a moral issue. So on the left side of the screen there, those are all Catholics. The red line is the fall. The blue line is the spring. So in each instance, those things go up. We can see also in this slide that it's become a moral issue, it's become a justice issue, and it's become a poverty issue. So all this is to say is that I think in your parishes you'll find that an awful lot of people are with you on this, if this is something you want to tackle a little bit more. And I would also just think about the size and scope of our Catholic Church. There are somewhere around the neighborhood of 73 million Catholics, or about 24% of the US population. I think there's about 18,000 parishes. I never get a solid number, but give or take 1,000. 573 Catholic hospitals that treat 84.7 million patients in 2005. These numbers are a little dated. 6,500 elementary schools, 1,300 plus high schools, 2.5 million students, 244 Catholic colleges and universities. So we're a big church. If 5% of us were organized and acting on the issue of the environment, we would be almost 3 times larger than the entire membership of World Wildlife Fund in the United States. So we have the ability to do this. We have partnerships, for instance, with the Conference of Catholic Facilities Management. I'll be going out there next week to give them a talk as well. But our parishes are the homes for the faithful. What does our home look like? How do our parishioners feel when they leave home on Sunday or any time we gather? What are they taking away? Obviously, the Word of God and the joy of celebrating Holy Eucharist and other sacraments. It's a place where we gather and send to transform the world on earth as it is in heaven. The quality of our gathering and our celebrating will influence. Is that my sound doing that? I'm going to, sorry about that, shut that off. The quality of our gathering and celebrating will influence the quality of our sending forth, our transforming. So when it comes to care for creation, we don't need to beat people over the head with it, but what if we offered up prayers about creation in our liturgies? Can we find music and symbols that demonstrate care for creation and care for the poor without ever mentioning climate change? Do our parishes celebrate with paper or plastic or dishware or recyclable and biodegradable products? And as I said, we're working closely with the Conference for Catholic Facilities Management to help encourage diocesan facilities managers to consider how they can create healthy and high-performing buildings. We help them ask, are the parish facilities airtight so we reduce energy use when we cool and heat our buildings? Do we have motion detecting switches in our rectories, schools, and parish halls? Are we heating or cooling rooms that are not in use? Are recycling bins clearly labeled around our parish campus? We take out to the world what we learn at home. Is it not inspiring that Paul VI Center at the Vatican is powered by solar? And this happened. Now you're going to say, well, of course, Mr. Climate Change Man, but let me just tell you. So I think about this in our own home. What are our kids? We have 3 kids. All of them are, well, they're mostly grown. But when my daughter was in high school, there was no environmental club at the all-girls Catholic school that she went to, Elizabeth Seton in our neighborhood. And so she decided to start an environmental club. I did not urge her, I did not encourage her, I didn't say anything. Of course, that's what Dad does for a living, so, but what I'm saying is that those are the values that she took from her home. What are the values that people are taking from our parish home, from our faith home? What Pope Francis said is, what we all need is an ecological conversion, whereby the effects of our encounter with Jesus Christ become evident in our relationship with the world around us. He says, living our vocation to be protectors of God's handiwork is essential to a life of virtue. Again, it's not an optional or secondary part of our Christian experience. I would also say get youth involved. We were having this conversation at lunch. Young people love to work on the environmental issues. Too often they don't even connect it with their faith. It's cool to be green, but can we also say it's cool to be Catholic and green? I think that's our challenge. And a lot of the work that we would want them to do, we're not going to do because it's hard. It's physically demanding. I'm thinking of like, is there a plot in your parish? I know some parishes are urban, some are suburban, some are rural, but if you have a little plot of land in your parish, have the kids make a community garden out of that. And that produce can go to support the local soup kitchen. What are some of those kinds of things? Are we planting native plants around our church properties? Are we using chemicals to kill the weeds in our lawns and so forth? I mean, all of these questions are important questions, and engaging the kids in those, and engaging our youth in those questions, I think really helps them make that connection between their faith and being environmentally cool. Now, here's the good news. We have a lot of resources to help you with this. And I learn every day that there are more and more resources out there. We can't keep up. Laudato Si has really sparked something, I think, across the Catholic community, and frankly, across the faith community, and the environmental community. I have people from the environmental community says, you've got the coolest Pope. And I kind of agree. So we have this is our, on the left side there, that's our resource page. We have comprehensive resources on creation care. We have homily helps. In fact, almost every Sunday of the year, if you click on our resources page and look for homily helps, you'll find them, and we are offering something for almost every Sunday in the year. So we have those for you. We have lots of resources on the encyclical itself. We have sustainability toolkits. We have videos. We have webinars. So go to our website, look under the resources tab, and you'll find all kinds of great stuff there. Much of it not created by us. The other thing that we're doing is we're trying to develop creation care teams. So we have a whole set of resources to help someone in your parish or your community, well, your parish community, to talk. How do we begin this whole creation care team? How do we bring in other people? How do I talk to my pastor about this? So we have all of these resources, and then what we do is every 2 weeks we send to the leaders of the creation care teams, we send them an email that has 3 things in it. If you only have 10 minutes, here's something that you can do in your parish. If you have an hour, here's another project. And here's something that you might want to consider on an ongoing basis. So it can be very hands-on things like, seeing if there's a way to switch out the plastic for something that's more biodegradable, or using washable dishes and things like that, to advocacy. There's a bill in your state that needs some attention, or maybe you write a letter to the editor on something that you saw in the newspaper that you agree with or disagree with. So we have these kinds of resources for them as well. That's the creation care teams. We also, I neglected to bring those down. I'll leave them on the table, but we worked with Renew International to produce a book that is, I think it's a 14-week small faith group study guide. So you can get it through Renew. We helped to put it together. Green Faith, which is an ecumenical partner, interfaith partner, helped to put it together with Renew International. It's great. I really think it's terrific. And it's not just because we had something to do with it, but I just think it's a really good resource. It's very user-friendly. It's not way out there that you might expect or or anticipate. It's really grounded in Catholic teaching and Catholic doctrine. We have a lot of plans for the future. One of the things that we'll be working on over the summer is to put together a pastoral training program in collaboration with the bishops and other departments at the U.S. Bishops' Conference to see if we can form either a half-day or a full-day program for bishops to use with their priests. So does anybody remember the Preaching the Just Word program? Raise your hand if you've heard of that. Yeah, so that was out of Woodstock Theological Center in Georgetown. My former boss, John Carr, was part of that. Walter Burkhart was part of that. We were thinking about that model. How do we help pastors become more comfortable talking about environmental questions, talking about creation care in ways that that they feel won't get them into trouble? How do you deal with the person who comes up and says, this climate change thing's a bunch of hooey, you're in league with the environmentalists and the people who want to have population control and all that kind of stuff? So it's a program that would help you feel comfortable stepping out a little bit further on this issue, because I know that that's a big problem. I give talks all over the country, and mostly to lay groups, and I always hear, my pastor never talks about this. Of course, I'm sure if it was immigration, they'd say, my pastor never talks about this. But anyway, so we're trying to help you feel comfortable talking about creation care a little bit more. We also are trying to get our toes into the Hispanic Catholic community, which is, as you know, keeping us afloat, as it were, in terms of numbers in the Catholic Church. We don't have a very good outreach. Our Spanish language page is pathetic, so if you know Spanish, don't go there. So we're trying to figure that out a little bit more. That's part of our future plans. I'm happy to announce today, for the first time publicly, that the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, under the leadership of Archbishop Schnurr, is going to work with the Covenant and another organization out of